Welcome in, everyone, to Swarm Talk here on a Sunday night. My name is Bryce Kuhn, your host of all things Georgia Tech here on the Crowded Booth, and we welcome you in for a live show. Is interesting topic to be talking about here in the month of February. But before we get started, I want you to do a couple things for me. Hit that like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, continue to climb those numbers. We appreciate you doing that. And if you're listening over in those podcast feeds, make sure that you leave us a good review. Or a review of any kind, and 5 stars would be fantastic and welcome, but we appreciate you listening on those platforms as well. Thanks and shout out to our partners at Believe, and the presenting sponsor of today's show, which is obviously, as always, if you're a Georgia Tech fan, you know what I'm talking about. It is indeed Section 103. They just released some great hats. You need to use code GROUDEDBOOTH to get 10% off your first order today. They have continued great gear. And I'm serious. I'm honest. Look, I know that the Adidas deal leaves a little bit to be desired, but this is a good deal, and you want to take advantage of it. You want to be a part of it. Make sure you use code CrowdedBooth for 10% off your first purchase today. Before we get you into the meat and potatoes of tonight's show, continue to plug. Super Bowl Sunday is just a week away, folks, and you want to use Underdog, you want to make yourself some money, well, here's how you can do it. Tired of the old, outdated way of playing fantasy? It's time to try Underdog Fantasy. If you want to make some picks on your favorite sports, check out Underdog Fantasy Pick'em game, where you choose higher or lower on between 2 to 8 players, and you can win up to 1,000 times your initial entry. Make sure to use code CROWDED when you sign up, so you can get up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free pick. Think you know ball better than us? Don't miss out on this great offer and compete against the Crew to showcase your knowledge today. The Crew was over in Mobile, Alabama, and we play some underdog picks, not victorious on Saturday night's NBA slate, but we're going to continue to rock and roll through the college hoop slate, through the NBA slate, and getting ready for Super Bowl Sunday. So make sure you take part in that with us all week long. All right, so the big news coming into this, and the big news I think, that we want to talk about, and funny enough, I was with Gavin, I was with Ralph, I was with Will in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, where if you haven't already, if you're a Georgia Tech fan or you're just tuning in, check out the interview with Jackson Hall's stand-up young man. I think he represents the program well. And jokingly aside, he's the kind of guy that you want to not just date your daughter, but in general, you just kind of want to, write your recommendation. And what does it need to be for? I don't know. The guy spent multiple years at Yale, and he's got a degree from Yale and a master's degree from Georgia Tech. So it's like, just whatever you want it to be, let him be a part of it, and he'd probably help you out some way, form, or fashion. But obviously the big news, and let's just kind of talk about this. Santucci to the NFL, right? There goes the light. Got to love it. I'm going to play a quick ad, and then we're going to come right back because we got to get the lighting going. We cannot let it do that. So check out our good friends over at Dr. Squatch.
Your soap is ugh, and your body wash is a synthetic detergent. But you're not a dish. You're a man. Switch to Dr. Squatch Natural Soap for Men. For men who build things. Open pickle jars on the first try. Slay dragons. And let their daughters braid their hair. Men who like to feel good and smell titillating. Dr. Squatch takes you places you never thought you'd go. Naked.
All right, we're back here. The lighting is fixed, and we're back here on the show. So let's talk about this. Tyler Santucci. What is the impact of this move? Because I wanted to talk about this. I've seen a lot of takes about this on social media, but I wanted to kind of talk about this tonight. The impact of losing your defensive coordinator as the calendar turns to February. There's seemingly 2 schools of thought. And I think we can praise one side. We can talk about one side of it. We can also take a look at the other side and kind of be like, well, Bryce, not ideal. And look, there's 2 sides to every coin, right? And I think this is a perfect example. And so let's start off with maybe some of the positives of this. Where I'll start with the move of Santucci going to, the NFL is essentially in what I just said. Your defensive coordinator is now the linebackers coach on a team that's a perennial Super Bowl contender. You just had one of the top 8 teams in the NFL, top 6 teams in the NFL say, you know what? I like what that guy's doing down there in one of the more successful NFL franchises of recent memory. I know they haven't won a Super Bowl, but you're not defined by just winning championships. And what they've been able to do, and we're going to put him as our linebackers coach. You know, they fired their linebackers coach, I believe, a week and a half ago. You are going to be under the tutelage of Jesse Minter, who is a guy that, funny enough, was the DC at Michigan previously a long time ago, was a guy that was on staff at Georgia State. And Minter's a rising name in the coaching ranks as well. So when you start to kind of do the math of this situation, your DC just left, but he just took a coveted position role, which that's his bread and butter, the linebacker spot, under a DC who's a riser, and under one of the most stable head coaches that we've seen in quite some time. All of those things tell you is you're really 2 or 3 moves away from being a head coach in the NFL. I mean, let's just say that Baltimore has another good year. Next year, is Jesse Minter a guy that is going to be in the running for, and I apologize, Jesse Minter is not. I'm sorry. I apologize. It's Zach Orr, who is the defensive coordinator. I got the name wrong. Jesse Minter had previously been there. So this is to me, in my opinion, when you look at this, okay, scratch what I just said. Jesse Minter's in San Diego. That was a brain fart. Zachary Orr is your DC. If Zachary Orr, I mean, I don't see John Harbaugh getting fired anytime soon. But if Zachary Orr is a coaching candidate next offseason or in 2 off seasons, Santucci's doing a good job. Could see him being elevated. Santucci does a really good job for 2 years. Maybe he's elevated to NFL defensive coordinator somewhere else. If something else happens after that, in the span of 4 to 5 years, 5-6 years, Tyler Santucci could find himself sitting in the head coach's chair of an NFL, front office. And it's not a knock against Georgia Tech. It just feels like the path to upward movement, man. If his goal is to be an NFL head coach, then moving to Baltimore makes complete 110%. So it's a good look for Georgia Tech, the fact that you hired a guy that is well thought of. It tells you Brent Key hired the right type of guy to be on his staff and in the program. And then, too, just from a opportunity to grow, this is a great move for Tyler Santucci. I mean, this is not just, and I'll tell you this, this is not just some type of, random job this guy took. I mean, he took a really good job for a really good organization. And you just can't fault the guy for bettering himself. And that's kind of how this thing went. So that's the impact of the move in the positive. Now, let's talk about the negative, because obviously the negative is that, yeah, you get to see one of yours and it becomes maybe a more marketable position than it had in years past. But now the issue is, if you're focusing on the present, well, what do you do from here? Because it's kind of late in the cycle, because obviously, you're down to 2 NFL teams left and the coaching carousel has slowed down a little bit. There's still some moves, but when you talk about the money situation, which I've talked to multiple people about this, Georgia Tech has money to go hire somebody. It's, do they allocate that or not? You would also look from within. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But just the impact of losing your defensive coordinator in the month of February, albeit your first year essentially defensive coordinator. I mean, he's been on campus for 1 full year at this point. There's a couple of things that I'm hesitant about. There's a couple of things that I'm a little nervous about when I take a look at this. The impact of this move in the negative light is, the first thing is that you have to worry about attrition. And the good old boy and the hunky-dory, people are going to say, well, they're bought in and this is taking, and that's just not the reality of college football nowadays. It doesn't mean that there's some guys that are going to say, you know what, that's fine, I'm going to stay, I want to be a part of this. But there is an aspect of this where you have to wonder, you have to at least think to yourself, if this move had happened when the portal was open, would attrition have occurred? Well, now when the spring portal opens, you got to think, as for a lot of these guys, who they were recruited by, guys who were going to be their position coach, maybe it's not the same thing they felt like they signed up for, much less last year, but also just entering this new spring semester. So it's not an end of the world type of loss for Georgia Tech to lose Tyler Santucci, but it does raise questions just that you kind of have to wonder. And I think a lot of fans will just be kind of twiddling their thumbs and wondering, okay, we can't wait for that spring portal to close. And as least amount of names as possible, that's what we want to see. So I just think in general, when you look at that, that's kind of the big question for me is, are there names that maybe don't feel like that the people that are there that they signed up to play under are there anymore? Because look, head coaches are involved in recruiting as well, but the most time that you spend is with the guys in your position room and the guys on your side of the ball. And so, look, for this linebacking core, they've seen not just their position coach leave, they've seen their DC, their side of the football leave. And so it'll be interesting to monitor. Are there any guys that say, you know what are the relations like elsewhere? What are the relations like elsewhere within that staff? Are there guys that they've matriculated to? Are there guys that they've grown close to? And it's just a question, and it's going to be a question until the spring portal window closes after spring practice. That's just a natural thing. It's not a knock or it's not anything. It's just the natural flow of events. The next thing that you're going to see. So that's interesting. Do you have that? Now, the second concern that I'll bring to the table in this with Tyler Santucci leaving is the continuity aspect. This was a defense that was historically really bad over the past, before last season, going into the previous college seasons. And this year, I felt like Tyler Santucci did a great job with the guys that were able to get in the portal last cycle. I felt like he did a good job in terms of doing what he could with what he had. And the hope was in 2025, you get more of your guys in there. The guys that you had recruited would continue to grow, the younger players. And now you have to wonder. And I'm telling you, this is going to happen because on this show, we talk in depth about Georgia Tech all the time. But for the people who don't talk about Georgia Tech all the time, the immediate casual take is going to be, well, they lost their DC, massive red flag. And even though we're in the trenches here talking about this, yes, that is a massive question mark. It's a massive, not necessarily red flag, but it's something that you have to be willing to acknowledge could be an issue, could be a red flag, is the continuity aspect. You're going to be rolling into this season with a new DC, a new guy, a new head man calling the plays. What does that mean for you going forward in the development of some of these guys? What does it mean for you if you don't promote from within with the relationship between new DC and the position coaches that Tyler Santucci helped, obviously, and had some type of say in bringing in? It's natural. It's the natural process of questions that it just arise when any type of move has this. And I see Clayton down there says Chip Kelly is leaving Ohio State, by the way. Ohio State is the same question. They've now lost their DC and their OC. It's just the natural questions. So I didn't feel great, I would say, just personally. I think there's some question marks on Georgia Tech's defense, especially in the front seven heading into spring ball. Now you have to wonder, what is that going to look like as you're about a month and a half away from the start of spring practice? Is Brent Key going to move swiftly on this? It's been a quick to fire, kind of slow to hire type of process, I feel like, for Key. But who could be an option? I think that's the next question that I have. Is we've talked about the impact of the move, the positive aspects of it, some of the negative aspects of it as well. But who could be a positive option that helps you? Well, let's start from the inside. I was talking with some people on the way back from, going back from Mobile on the drive back last night. And the big question was, what about Jess Simpson? Now, for those that, maybe don't know, just off the top of their head, defensive line coach for Georgia Tech, has been at several stops, has coached at the high school level, coached at the college level. And the overwhelming response that I got from people, both have been inside that building and both are, in and around the program, was he is more than capable in their eyes. This is per people, in their eyes, of being the defensive coordinator for Georgia Tech in 2025. He understands the workload. He could understand, obviously, Tyler Santucci, what he want to do. There could be, like we talked about, it would honestly eliminate a lot of the continuity potential problems that you would have with a new hire. So that could be interesting in the sense of the continuity purpose. I like Jess Simpson. I think he did a really good job with guys like Thomas Gore and Jordan Vandenberg this past year. And look, I mean, that's going to be the big kicker on this side of the football entering 2025 is what type of development can you get out of what you lost to graduation, and what type of development can you get out of some of the younger guys that are looking to take another step in the program. So when you really dive deep in that, is what does Jess Simpson look like as a candidate? There's a lot that makes sense about that. The question has to be: is Brent Key, does he want to go that route? Is that a guy that he wants, leading that defensive side of the football? That's obviously something that no one should even try to answer, but people will try to answer as if they know what's going on in people's heads. So there's that. When you get away from the picture is where you start to wonder, okay, you look at the rest of the staff, and I mean, look, I'm gonna list some of the names here for you. Like, let's just talk about what they have. Okay, Santucci has obviously coached the coordinator and the linebacker. He's the DC and the linebackers coach. You have Jess Simpson, who probably has the most extensive resume. You have Corey Peoples. Okay, you have Kyle Pope, who coached the outside linebackers and defensive ends. You start to kind of go to who they could, senior defensive analyst. You had Kevin Leonard this past year, and I don't know if some of these guys are on staff or not. I haven't, checked. You have Quentin Jones, who's helped out with the safeties. You've got other guys as well. I know this is definitely not updated on Georgia Tech's website, but you have some options, and I think the best option, if you're going to go in-house, just my opinion, is to elevate Jess Simpson, find yourself a defensive line coach, or elevate one of the guys that you currently have as a senior quality and let Kyle Pope assist that. That's a large task, but I don't know of, and this is not a knock, I just don't know if there's an extensive resume on the defensive side of the football outside of Jess Simpson that you would really trust handing the headset to in terms of the DC role. So there's that. Now let's take a step outside of where you would go with this. Lots of names have just kind of been, thrust around, and I made a list here that I wanted to make sure I got to of just some of the names and what you could look at in terms of, okay, here are options that you could roll with. A lot of people have brought up the name of Jason Seymour. And for Jacket fans that maybe don't remember, in the sense of who is Jason Seymour, this is a guy with over 15 years of coaching experience, including spending some time in Atlanta. He was a guy who was really instrumental in Charlie Thomas and Ace Ely really having a good year in their last season. They're both top 25 nationally in tackles. Ace Ely was ranked third in the country in fumbles force. And also, per Football Scoop, who does a pretty good job, Seymour's named their linebackers coach of the year. Now, he left to join Charles Huff's staff at Marshall. For a lot of people who, and we're getting out of focus here, for a lot of people who maybe didn't follow the moves that happened there, Charles Huff left Marshall after winning the Sun Belt title this past year, went down to Southern Miss. Jason Seymour was brought along with him. So that would be something that would be interesting to kind of monitor. Could there be a potential reunion between Georgia Tech and Jason Seymour? That's a name that I think you're going to see thrown around. What is the validity of it? No, but you can connect the dots. Anybody can, of why that could be an option. You look at some of the other names that you kind of have along there as well, and I want to make sure I get this profile right as well. You look at a guy who just came off of being on everyone's favorite head coach this past year over at Indiana, just came off that staff, and he's on the James Madison staff currently. Lyle Hemphill is a guy that is kind of been a name that you kind of throw around. He was on Duke's staff back in 2021. It's a name that has been thrown around, and I think that when you look at where they could go with all of this, this is a guy who has been really good at James Madison. They ranked in this past year, James Madison ranked 9th in points allowed, 5th in yards per play allowed, 8th in yards per rush allowed, 2nd in opponent completion percentage. And I think he has a good understanding of the layout of the ACC. And also, it would be something that you kind of look at as, look, are you going to go with a riser or are you going to go with a retread? And that's where a lot of fans are going to have different types of conversation about it. And I think that is worth the type of conversation in terms of what are you going to do that makes the move. And you felt like you got a good riser. I mean, from the day Tyler Santucci was hired, you heard nothing but great things. You just lost a really, really good recruiter too, and a guy that had really made an impact on when he visited schools and talking with some high school coaches. That was a guy that was like, hey, we respect what he's about and what he's doing up there in Atlanta. So there's that aspect of it. Okay, so you can look at that. A name that I'm just going to throw out here. Okay, and it's a guy who I can confirm was interviewed before and was strongly considered. I will use that term in quotations. Strongly considered before Tyler Santucci was made the hire is former LSU defensive coordinator and current Jaguars coach. I believe he's still on the Jaguars staff. Probably not anymore because they overhauled their staff. Coaching takes, forever to talk about. But Matt House. Matt House was let go in, I can't remember exactly when it was for LSU. Resurfaced in Jacksonville at the NFL level, has spent time in Kansas City on the Chiefs. To me personally, and look, I mean, it's kind of a best of both worlds in talking about Matt House just in general because he's a guy that I got to watch up close for one full season down here in Baton Rouge, is probably more of an NFL guy. And I don't know how much Brent Key really liked what they saw in terms of Matt House during those interview processes. I know he was at least interviewed once. I've heard that he was interviewed potentially 2 times. So there had to be something there that Brent Key went back to the well and said, you know what, I might like that. But would that be an option for them? And that's just a name that was brought up last cycle. Would they go back to that well? And where is Matt House even coaching now? Let's see where he is currently. He was this past year was the current linebackers. He was the current linebackers coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, that's something that when you look at, he spent time in the SEC. He's, was on Kentucky's staff back in 2016. You start to kind of look at what the options are, and those are just a couple of names. I mean, Jason Seymour makes a lot of sense to me just in terms of the reunion factor. But is that a guy that, Brent Key wants to bring back a part of what he has going on? Look, I mean, someone even threw out the name Jeremy Pruitt. Is that a guy that, Georgia Tech would look at? Former LSU DC, like I talked about. I talked about Matt House. My biggest concern is the continuity in the player retention. And it just puts you in this situation of where you might have to value what you have in-house more. And I'm not saying that hiring Jess Simpson, I see GT Buzz says there, had said earlier he want, my first choice, even though it's a long shot, would be Freddie Roach at Alabama. And then he says later that, if you can't get Freddie Roach, I'd give Jess Simpson a shot. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think anybody would be mad. Like, and then obviously until the games start, and something goes wrong because that's how fans are. But I don't think anybody would be really upset or mad if Jess Simpson was made the DC, because continuity is such a huge thing that is so hard to find. And I think that the players might respond better to that. And just in general, I think it'd be interesting. Hal Rhodes said, can we expect that if asked, Coach Tyler Santucci would have recommended someone on staff? Love Seymour, but is he a disciple of Elko and Tucci? I would love to stay in his system with our guys. And how that's the big concern for me. And to answer your question, it's certainly possible. I mean, hard to kind of confirm that type of information, but certainly possible that it could happen. But to Hal's comment here about staying in the system, right? Like, continuity is so hard in terms of your roster, management. We were, you saw the news kind of public over the past, week or so that on average, every team is turning over about 33%, a third of their roster every year in terms of transfer portal and in terms of high school entries. That's crazy. Like that's just nuts in terms of that. And so if you can keep the core, which you feel like you have defensive players that could make up the core, right? Like, I think everyone feels pretty okay with Jordan Vandenberg in the middle of your defensive line. You've got Kyle Leaford at linebacker, who's going on into year 3 of what he's doing in Atlanta. You've got some linebacker continuity that I feel like they feel okay with. The secondary, I think, is going to look completely different just because of what you lost in terms of graduating and guys like that. But when you look at what they could bring in terms of a coach, you really wonder about the overhaul of that and what does it do to the locker room. And you'd have to immediately get into install and spring practice, and it goes back to the reaction I have of this. If it looks great, man. I mean, you just hired a guy who got a really, really good job. On the other side of the coin, it really is. It is very much, in my opinion, kind of it kind of sucks. Like if you're a Georgia Tech fan, because you're kind of sitting here thinking, man, you're going to have Faulkner for year 3, you're going to have Santucci for year 2, and I think every Georgia Tech fan that knew is like that. You don't know how much longer you're going to have that combination because they're doing well in their respective roles. It would have just been nice. It'd been a luxury, we'll say that, to have them both for one more year. But if you believe in Brent Key making the right hire, which I believe he did in hiring Santucci and hiring Faulkner, then you believe that, hey, can it happen again? And I mean, is he going to make a hire that is viewed immediately after 1 year as a guy that they want in the NFL? That's a very specific thing, that they would have to look at. And I don't know the answer to that, but we have to kind of see how that plays out. And so it begs the question to kind of what you're talking about, how I think staying in the same system and hiring Jess Simpson, what would the reaction be to that? Well, I can't wait to do the live show if that does indeed happen. But I think what I would say here about it is you have to understand continuity matters. And look, hindsight's going to be 2020. If they bring Jess Simpson there and it flops and it's not good and it's bad, everyone's going to clown the hire. Well, if you'd have known that at the time, you never would have done it. And that's the risk you take in being a head coach, and that's what you have as well. So that would be interesting, in my opinion, to kind of see. But reminder, hindsight's 2020. So I think in February, March, I think general population wouldn't be mad about if you were retained and I should say promoted Jess Simpson to the defensive coordinator spot, because you could rationalize it. If it doesn't work out, well, of course, when stuff doesn't work out, everyone acts like they knew that was going to happen to begin with. Randall Sanders has a big name here. Not even sure if Key will even make the call, but Will Muschamp would be a big splash hire. Randall, I don't think that this is necessarily super realistic. What I would say to that is there's coaches that make calls all the time, to the agents and say, what could we do here? What can we do that? And look, I think Will Muschamp's a really good defensive coordinator. Like, just, outside of it, I think that he's a very, very good defensive coordinator in that sense. So it'd be very interesting to see their kind of what they do. TD Jake says, give me Lance Guidry ASAP, who, funny enough, just joined the LSU staff. It could be interesting. I know LSU fans aren't too happy about that. Power says, what would Dr. Bob say? I don't know what Dr. Bob would say. He's not here tonight. Clayton says, any chance they give Georgia Tech Dynasty National Champion Bryce Kuhn a call? They could. Would not be a great one. Wouldn't make a great one. Aaron Holland says, still on the hunt for special teams coordinator. Question he's asking. Aaron, my assumption is that Tim Salem's going to be the guy. That's going to be what they roll with. It'll be interesting to see. We'll talk about that. The coaching staff being set in terms of all the on-field coaches and your analyst. We'll see what happens. But look, Tim Salem took over the reins after Ricky Brumfield parted ways with Georgia Tech, and so Salem, for all intents and purposes, there has been a lot of noise on that. And you've got your cornerback, your defensive back duo with the hire of the young man from Alabama. So kind of feels like that's where you are. And when I say young man from Alabama, the kid's young. I think he's like my age. Seriously, I think he's a little around my age, like either early 30s or late 20s. So it'll be interesting to monitor there as well. But obviously the big news, the big news is Tyler Santucci off to the NFL. And like we talked about, if you're missing it, you can go back, and obviously you've been tuning in. We appreciate you doing that over on YouTube. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel. This is a good thing for the perception of what it means to be a position coach or a defensive, coordinator, offensive coordinator at Georgia Tech. This is a good thing. Like, they're not hiring guys from programs that are just flopping. And let's just make that abundantly clear. This is a nice move that works for them, for Baltimore, I should say. It does kind of suck in the interim for Georgia Tech, because now you're kind of left scrambling at a weird portion of the year. And I talked with two coaches last night, and I said, it's kind of interesting that you're in this spot, in such a pivotal spot this time of the year, because everything's changed so much. So it'd be interesting. Hal does say, let's get to this question real quick. Has Jess Simpson ever been a coordinator at the college level? All right, let's go back to where he has been. He coached, I'll read it off to you. So he was the co-DC and the defensive line coach at Duke in 2022. He was then moved over to the assistant head coach role. Now, one thing to know in 2022 at Duke is it's an interesting chain of events, okay? If you really kind of go for what you're looking here, Mike Elko, that's his defense. Tyler Santucci is the prodigy under him, under the tutelage, okay? And then you have Jess Simpson, who obviously has a say, in that. So that's how that works. Simpson was the assistant head coach and the defensive line coach at Miami in 2021. He was the Falcons defensive line coach from 2019 to 2020. Nowhere else has he been a defensive coordinator or a coordinator in general until he was at Buford from 1999 and 2004. Before then, he made the head coaching switch. So really, he has never been a full DC at the defensive or at the college football level. He was a co-DC, to answer your question there, Hal, in 2022 at Duke. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for all the great content we've got coming over here on the Crowded Booth. College football season might be over in terms of games, but the content never stops. Some more interviews coming from Mobile, Alabama. We were out there with the crew. Had a good time talking with Jackson Halls. We talked with Tyler Shuck. That interview is going to come out on Monday, so make sure you check that out. Be a lot of interesting stuff to talk about and more as the week goes along. Lawson says beat Colorado. Man, that game just became so much more interesting with Santucci gone and Dion staying. Lots of interesting things to be talking about in that one. He says beat Colorado, so does Clayton. We appreciate you tuning in. My name is Bryce Kuhn. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow us on those podcast platforms, and check out Underdog, where you can use code CROWDED. You want to do it, be a part of the crew, get it in time for Super Bowl Sunday. It'll be a lot of fun. We'll catch you next time here on the Swarm Talk, brought to you by the Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Kuhn.